trying to help people to become servant leaders in the world today, what stands in their way of doing that? What are the difficulties with that in the workforce from your perspective?
But two things, and they're very simple on the surface, of course, like everything else, and then they become challenging. One is presence, right? So to use the presence in its current vernacular, and then in a broader sense, to presence of be there, listen to people, engage with them, be physically present, which, obviously during COVID, you heard a lot about this whole presence thing, and can you be there? And if you can't, how do you be present kind of intellectually, emotionally, without being physically present? But anyway, again, in the broad sense of the word, be present, but also physically present if you can be. Very difficult to lead if you're not present, right? And then the other one is to be a decent person. And that strikes some people as very odd. Not somebody like yourself who studies servant leadership of being a decent person, but you encounter people who are just not decent people, and they view leadership as, well, this is point, we're at point A and this is point B, and we have to get there, and I'm going to lead the team to get there, and if we have to knock down a few buildings on the way, so be it. That's not being a decent person. But bringing people along, being a decent person along the way, is something that I always strive to do. Whether I'm successful, you'd have to ask the people who work in our organization. But that's something that I think is frequently lost, or to your point, is difficult or stands in the way of people. Maybe they don't consciously go into things looking to be not so good people or not being decent people, but when stress happens, when you have to get a job done, when you have to get from point A to point B, that sometimes is one of the first things that leaves the building, right? And if you want to be a good leader, it can't be. You've got to maintain that. So maintain presence and be a decent person. Like everybody else who's done a lot of things for a long period of time, I've made a lot of mistakes. So I'm quite willing to share the mistakes that I've made or the problems that I've run into because of my experiences, and in order to help them, either avoid them or work out of them or overcome them. So that, I guess there's a certain vulnerability to that, to admitting that, hey, I did this wrong before, so I can help you avoid it. And, so that's part and parcel of being a decent person. So those are kind of the characteristics that spring to mind first.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I have no aversion to vulnerability, by the way, because I actually have come to the realization I think that people from our background, that can be tough for sure, to embrace because we have this, deeply ingrained in our body, the idea of competence is king. We have to lead with competence, and especially in a military environment where people get hurt if you don't, right? So yeah, but I also have learned a little painfully over the years that vulnerability is absolutely necessary to connect with people, to build, to be seen as approachable. And what I often tell people is that competence, a great deal of competence with a dash of vulnerability, not overdoing it to the point where people, see it as wishy-washy or less. Yeah. So, but just enough to connect.
Yeah. Well, and there is an expression that I won't get it right. I mean, there's a little meme that goes around with Sinatra with a glass of wine or something, and it's something to do with experience comes from or wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment, or something like that.
Yes, that's it. That's it. Yep.
But much of my competence, for better, or I wouldn't say much, but some of my competence comes from having gone down the wrong path on occasions, and learned the pain of doing that, being able to resurrect myself from that. But still, that is, your some of your experiences in a lot of ways, and if those experiences are bad, you better learn from them. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that expression.
Well, I mean, to make it to being a CEO of a $200 million company is pretty amazing. What would you credit that to if you had to look back on your career, what you've been able to accomplish? And
I think I used this expression before, that it's a sum of a lot of different things, right? It's education for sure, the experiences, and so you have to have the in your vernacular, everybody talks about now having not only IQ, but you have to have EQ. And if you're going to have one that's better than the other, you should probably have a higher EQ. I think having a good solid base in education, certainly having military experience, and then I have a graduate degree, so I have kind of the technical proficiency too in some aspects of our business. But I think those things, but you can only attribute so much to education. It's also the progression of having experiences along the lines, a long time over time, and be proficient at positions, be willing to take risks, um, be willing to, fail is not the right word, but be willing to challenge yourself, go down different roads where you might not see immediate success. Delayed gratification is certainly something that I tell people about. Um, because if I had rifled through my early career and I'd gone from brand manager to director right into like a VP level role, I don't know that I would have been prepared, but I had enough background in each one of the positions that where I had responsibility, I had enough time in grade, so to speak, to learn that position and become effective, and then transition to the next one at a point where I was ready, rather than transition too quickly. So those things all helped, and not least of which is the ability to communicate. And again, I'll use that in a broad sense. Communicate, like you and I are doing right now, but also to be able to translate complex information to much simpler form, to be able to aggregate lots of data and be able to bring it down into a digestible format that's presentable either to an audience or to subordinates or what have you. So I threw out a lot at you, but that's there's not one thing. There are a lot. It's a combination of a lot of things.
you offered that EQ versus IQ. EQ is probably more important. Um, I mean, I don't know what it was like in 1988 when you were going through things, but for as powerful of a leadership development institution West Point was for both of us, I felt like we didn't do anything around emotional intelligence, and in fact, we
Nope.
had to learn it the hard way post
Yeah.
military. In fact,
Yeah. But if you look at your experience at West Point, only part of it is the stuff that you learn in the classroom or out in the field. A lot of it is what, your company mates and teammates and that sort of thing. And you develop, either you do or you don't develop a lot of EQ there. I grew up you grew up in DC, so it was probably very similar, a little younger, but not that much. I mean, when I was growing up, sports wise or anything wise, really, you figured out how to do things. You figured out how to play football, or you figured out how to play hockey or basketball, or you didn't do it, right? So, or you engaged in conversation with people, or you didn't have any friends. So you were kind of forced into that situation of having to get into the mix and interact with people. And I think a lot of that was true at West Point too. If you chose to be on your own, I mean, it would be hard, granted, to hang out with, just a small group of friends and not really engage with the broader academy or with other company mates or this or that. You could probably do it, but you wouldn't be successful and you probably wouldn't have a very good time. So I guess that getting back to my original point is, we learned a lot of, all the academic stuff and all the military stuff, and certainly did all the physical stuff. But you were learning at that same time, or, in a lot of ways, you were learning how to interact with people, because you you figured out pretty quickly who the guys who were dicks and who you didn't want to hang out with because they were just like too whatever. And then you learned out, okay, these people are okay. I'll hang out with them. And that that's kind of the story of my life. I come from a large family, so I kind of learned how to interact with people there. The academy, same way, and then in business, is the same way. Kind of linking into people who are I don't know if like-minded is the right way, but kind of think of the world in the same way that you do. People who are successful, who can mentor you, people who enjoy doing what they're doing, people who are positive. So, I agree with you. You're never taught. You don't. Nobody even really, as you suggest, nobody. I'm sure they knew about EQ, but nobody talked about EQ then. But you were developing it, hopefully. And so one other thing that you asked, how can we be more practical in terms of servant
Yes,
leadership?
please, please.
So I never try and look at things in negative, but this is one area where you're probably hearing vignettes, stories about hey, this happened and this person really chose to do the right thing and made a great impression on me. And the opposite is true too, which you also know. You learn so much from people who are not servant leaders, right? So, from a practical perspective, if you're really trying to teach people, maybe the way to start is, have you ever seen a person who's not a servant leader? Yes, you have. And these are the characteristics that they follow. And this is the difference between, yes, are they a leader? Yeah. But are they an efficient, effective, and a servant leader? Not really, because they didn't do, you can use then your little flow chart and say, hey, they didn't do X, Y, or Z. But in a lot of ways, I try and tend to be on the positive side of things, but there's always an opportunity in this case to kind of learn from the negative, how if you see what's wrong, you also kind of can envision what's right.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of the things that I offer in my programs, the fundamentals class, is you probably learn more leadership from the worst leaders that you work for than the
Mhm.
best. And
Yeah.